All right, everybody. Hello, Protectors. Welcome to another episode of the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Greg LaBeouf here with you. Got Coach Dustin, Coach Brad with me. And tonight's topic, we're going to jump right into things tonight. The question nobody wants asked, can you kill? There are so many angles we can look at this, but this is so important for people to listen to this discussion, to really think about this. Because as I said, nobody wants to ask this question. Most people would never ask you this question. But if you're talking personal protection, you're talking self-defense, and you want to talk about the realities of that, it's got to be the first fucking question out of your mouth. Stick with us tonight. We're going to dive deep. Every day I hear more stories of good people being brutally assaulted and murdered by some individual who has my two daughters. Well, I'm tired of screaming at the TV, and enough is enough. Throughout history, there have always been men willing to answer the call to the threats against our way of life. Well, today, that threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to protect his life, his family, and his property. I'm Greg LaBeouf. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. All right, guys. Obviously a serious topic tonight. Not that they're not always serious, but simple question: can you kill? I just want your guys' opinions right off the bat. A couple things, maybe. Why? Well, first off, I believe that it should be probably the first question that should be asked, and then I have a list of probably 4 or 5 main reasons why that's what I believe. But I want to throw it to you guys first. So, can you kill? What do you guys think of that question?
Yeah, the first thing that hit me, anytime you ask that question, is always yes. Like, I feel you can't not answer it, I think, no matter how many times it gets asked. So my visceral thing is like, yeah, 100%. But then the next thing that hit me right away was, why do so many people have such pushback to a question like that? And what I think is even more interesting is it's not a universal pushback all the time. And what I mean is, like, if someone said, like, oh, what are you going to do for your career? It's like, well, I want to join the military. I want to represent and fight for my country and everything my country believes in and all that. And I think a lot of people would be like, oh, that's amazing. Like, what a great thing. Like, yeah, thank you. Like, because maybe they don't want to do it. So they're grateful that you're going to do it. But nobody looks at that person that wants to be a soldier and goes like, oh, well, do you want to be a murderer? You want to kill people? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that never happens. Or if someone goes, oh, I want to be a police officer, when I finish school. And people are, oh, that's great. Like, you want to serve your community and all these things. And, like, it's such a positive. But then for some reason, if you say, oh, I want to protect my family, which happens to involve the potential for taking someone's life, just like being a police officer, just like being in the military, I think it's seen very differently. And then I don't think that's fair. And to me, it doesn't make any sense. So that's kind of just my visceral thought, is like, why such a pushback? Why is it different when it's on a personal, individual level versus something that's more of an occupation, a career choice, for a community or a country? Why does that change? So I guess I'm asking a question back to you guys.
No, I love it. I love the way you broke that down. That's really good, Brad.
Yeah, it hits me on 2 levels. One that we say all the time is context determines the content, right? Because that's just it. Like, what are we talking about? Like, obviously, if people are listening to the podcast, was this number 95 tonight? It's like we're always talking about the context that we're operating within, right? So it's not one of those questions. I think it is a question that people could answer and just gloss over, but really deeply reflect on it and have. I think it demands honesty. The question, because you do not want to be dishonest with this. Because if your answer is no, that's fine. Then there's follow-up questions to be like, okay, well, if this is what the pursuit that you want to do, you need to figure this out, right? But yeah, it needs to be taken seriously, and it can't be just, you can't answer this question with bravado, right? That if that is the case, you're operating on a different context. So it hit me on that part. And I know that I've personally talked about this on podcasts in the past. It's like, this question needs to be answered. And I agree, Greg. It's got to be one of the first questions that you're asked, because again, the last thing that I want to be doing is defending my life or the life of my loved ones from violent criminal assault and answering that very question at the exact same time.
Yeah.
It's not the place and it's not the time. These questions, and why it should be the first, because you need the time to answer those questions truthfully and honestly. So for me, like those are the two areas that it really hits me. But again, the last thing I want to be doing is trying to figure that out in the moment. That'll get you killed.
100%. Now, one of the things I'll just jump off what you just said at the end there, Brad, which is, you don't want to be trying to answer this question once you find yourself in a critical life and death situation. Can I kill? And the reason for that, like you just stated, right? Because it's not the time and it's not the place. But why? Why? What would that cause you? Well, conflicting beliefs can cause a psychic hindrance. So if you, like most of us, were raised, right, and whether you were raised religious or not, you probably still heard that, thou shalt not kill. You probably still understand that as one of, like, not just a religious commandment, but as probably like more like a human commandment, right? Like as in, you were taught violence is no good, don't hit, use your words, blah, 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 all this other stuff, which is, in a certain context, it's appropriate. And in other contexts, it's damaging. Because there's a massive difference. One of the things I'll put forward, and we can actually deep dive this a little bit later, but killing is different than murdering. Terminology matters. You have to separate those two things. And that ties back to what you said, Dustin. I mean, I really, really like that. If you just wrote out military, law enforcement, civilian, your points were amazing. Guy wants to join the military, potentially might have to take life to preserve life. Nobody questions it, right? Law enforcement, serve the community, same scenario. But the second the civilian is like, well, I also want to protect my family, and that may involve having to take life to preserve life. So I may have to kill. But right away, that's like, A, don't talk like that. B, what are you guys crazy? You shouldn't, like, how are you guys talking about this? Why? Because we're civilians? Because are civilians seen as sheep? Are they seen as, like, are we, like, what are we? Like, why is that the case? But, so all of those points are really good. And I think I just wanted to make sure we hit on that. The reason I believe you need to answer this, one of the reasons, is because if not, you can have a crisis of conscience. And that might not happen intellectually. That can happen deep subconsciously. And obviously, which would be worse? Your forebrain rationalization in the moment, it doesn't take much for your forebrain to go, like, think about it this way. A guy steals your parking spot. You're at the mall at Christmas, fucking driving around for half an hour looking for a parking spot. And finally, you're sitting there waiting. Guy pulls out. Some guy comes in and snakes your spot. Your forebrain very quickly, how long does it take for your forebrain to go to, like, I should get out, grab this guy in the car and smash his head in the fucking door? Well, it doesn't take that long because you're like, that guy just fucking wronged me. And it's over a parking space. So in the middle of a life and death crisis, our forebrain can rationalize very quickly that I might need to take life to preserve life. And that's where a lot of the macho surface, like, can you kill? Fuck yeah, I can kill, because men are expected to say yes. So you're battling paradigms and expectations and social pressures and all this other bullshit. But that doesn't mean you've done the real deep work. It's the midbrain, it's the deeper subconscious paradigms that cause conflict. So you don't want to be defending yourself or your family in a righteous fight, a righteous violent assault, with any type of psychic hindrances. You want to be clean. You want to be free. Okay, so I think that was just worth pointing out. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, you know what? Like, just to jump off of that, it made me think of a little bit of a follow up. Is what does it cost you not answering that question?
Yeah.
And where the maybe the perspective that I'm thinking about is, let's say that you find yourself in a situation, and you do take life to preserve life, and you haven't answered that question, and maybe deep down inside you're like, oh, maybe my answer is no. Like, what sort of trauma pie are you gonna have? Like, we're all good people, law-abiding people, and we just want to protect our families. And it's like, what does that look like if we did take life to preserve life? How does that ripple through the rest of our lives in a negative manner if we haven't answered that question? And we're like, well, I didn't mean to. Yeah. That's a dangerous and very slippery slope.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I guess even if you say I didn't mean to, I would throw in there real quick, I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to do it. But those are both the same thing, dangerous roads. Dustin.
I was just going to say, you alluded to this last week, Greg, which just goes one step further from what Brad's talking about, is like, if you haven't answered it for yourself, but if you also haven't explained it to your loved ones, to the people you're doing it for. If they don't understand that you've made that choice and why, you may or may not end up with trauma, like Brad's saying. But even if you don't, you may destroy relationships, the same relationships you were trying to protect,
Yeah.
because they don't understand how and why you did it.
Yeah. Okay. Let me, and those are awesome points. Let me maybe backtrack a bit to where I said that I genuinely believe that has to be one of the first questions. And let me just share some information with people that I think they might find interesting. There was a law enforcement organization down in the States. And what they started doing is when people would just come in to apply to become a police officer, so kind of like you said, Dustin, you coming out of school, university, and you're like, thought, geez, maybe I want to be a police officer. So you got together all of your requirements for your application process. When you went and handed that in, right away, right on the spot, they would take you into a back room and they would put you through a little mini interview. And it wasn't an interview for the job. It was an interview to see if you were even qualified to apply for the job. And that's very important right there. They gave these potential, police officer recruits. They're not recruits, they're potential. They just want to see if they can apply. And they gave them kind of a pre-screening process. And one of the questions that they asked them was, the very first question was, can you kill? Now, what they did is they painted a scenario for people. And so they said, okay, listen, assuming like you're a police officer, you and your partner, you come around the corner. And they painted out this full scenario. You see a chain link fence, you see a man on the ground, and you see a person standing over the gun pointing at his head. And you recognize that the person lying on the ground is a police officer, fellow officer. Now, the person is the bad guy. He's pointing the gun at the person's head. What do you do? And what they found, the interesting part of this study, is that they found between 30 to 35% of all applicants could not say that they would pull the trigger, that they would take their firearm out, shoot, and kill. Right? Now, a couple things. One, remember, when police officers discharge their weapons, they are shooting to kill. They're not shooting to wound, and let's not get Hollywood bullshit into this. They're shooting to try to terminate life, to take life, to preserve life. Now, what they found in these 35% of people that could not say yes is they kept trying to put forward alternative solutions to doing what was clearly needed to be done, which was to take life. They would say, I would radio for backup. I would call in the helicopter. I would, because these people, the suspect and the downed officer were on the other side of the chain link fence. I'd climb the fence. I'd dig under the fence. And of course, the interviewers are like, nope, that can't work. The chain link fence is too high. It's concrete. You can't dig under it. There's no backup. You can't do this. You can't negotiate. Like, just no matter what variation they tried to put forward, the answer was, that's not possible. So it only left them with one clear, viable decision, and that was to pull that trigger, take life, to preserve life. And yet they couldn't do it. And so the most powerful thing happened at that point when 30 to 35% of all applicants who are applying to become police officers, in the pre-interview, before they even got to hand in their application, could not say they can kill. There's a word for that, and it's called disqualified. You're not right for the job. And that, to me, is a very powerful thing, because if you go to the next part of this, I would put forward that denial kills twice. And so if you're in denial, like these candidates were clearly in denial of what the hardest parts of being a police officer could include. And one of the hardest parts is taking life. It's not the only hard part, but it's one of the hardest parts, is having to take life. No matter how we vilify criminal behavior, right? No matter how evil these people are, at the end of the day, you can't get around the fact that you're ending a human being's life. And now listen, I'm not saying that you can't be okay with that. I'm not saying that you can't rationalize and accept that in your brain, that you can't do. You can. Clearly, we can. But what I am saying is that for the vast, vast majority of people, whether they go into the military or they go into law enforcement or they're civilians, that requires some prep work. That requires a process of rationalization and acceptance. And there are a significant amount of people that simply cannot get there. They just can't, under any circumstances, say yes. And I'd go so far as to say, and you guys have met people like this too, but over 30 years of doing this, I've met people, and it still shocks me to this day, but I've met people that have put some real serious thought into this. And the conclusion that they come to is that they would rather die at the hands of another human being than to hurt that human being, because they simply could not live with themselves if they did that. And that, to me, and I know it is to you guys, is really challenging and difficult. It's really tough to get your head around, because my beliefs are different, my choice is different. And so I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because if people are when people come to us, this is one of the first questions that we ask is, when legally and morally justified, can you kill? Have you thought about this? Do you understand that? I'll put this forward, and then I'll let you guys jump in on this too. But I believe that the true roots of personal protection or self-defense, I hate that word, but whatever you want to call it, the roots of that is lethal force. Because what's worse than that? Like, what's worse than having somebody trying to take our lives? Because the single greatest right we have is the right to life. Because without life, no other right matters. It's just because you don't have life. So, to me, personal protection, the foundation has to be lethal force, because that is the worst situation that we could find ourselves in. That would be one of the hardest decisions to not only execute, but, as you guys alluded to live with. So if the root foundation of self-defense and personal protection is lethal force, then doesn't it make sense that that's the first question that we need to ask? We need to demand that we need to rip away a certain amount of people's denial and say, can you kill? Because denial, like I said, it kills twice. And I'll finish this thought, then I'll turn it to you guys. But denial is a coping mechanism that protects us from unwanted information. Wouldn't it be great to be able to defend yourself in a home invasion by violent predatory criminals who outgun and outman you with weapons and not have to ever take life? Like, wouldn't it be great just to know that you could just control or whatever with, of course, that'd be great, but that's not always the reality. So denial kills because it can kill you physically, because you are simply unprepared, because you could not look at the realities of what you're facing. So you're physically unprepared, and that costs you or your family your life. Just like those police officers. If you're a police officer and you're married, can you imagine if your wife found out that your partner refused to carry his gun? Or maybe even worse, he carried the gun and he never had any intention of using it. And so when your husband's life is in stake, he has no willingness to use that firearm to allow your husband to come home. Like, can you imagine how... Oh, it's hard to even talk about that. So the denial can kill us physically once. And the second way, and this ties into, Brad, what you were talking about, is it can kill you a second time, because if you're not prepared for the realities of it, the statistics of divorce, drug addiction, alcoholism, people losing their careers, losing their families, and of course, the biggest cost, suicide. The rates of suicide and destructive behavior by both military personnel as well as law enforcement personnel who are involved in righteous, lawful incidents where they, under moral and legal authority, took life to preserve life. It's not just one person that lost their life. It's not just the bad guy that lost his life. That incident destroys the lives, a second life, because people were simply not prepared for the realities of it. So that denial, it can kill us twice.
Yeah, I think one of the things we always talk a lot about it, and it goes back to that first question of can you kill, is we always talk about, like, what's one of the first things that allows people to be able to defend themselves against violent criminal assault, and that's accepting the realities of violence. And I think that when you have a situation where those aren't accepted, maybe they're not fully articulated or understood, it's really hard to truthfully answer that question because you don't understand. So it's almost you need a catalyst to really um, paint that picture of what violence actually is, so people could actually accept that. And I think that's a really big failing in a lot of things out there, because it gives people this false sense of security, because the realities of violent criminal assault and what some people are taught, they just don't line up. And again, it's taking life to preserve life. That is part of it, and it has to be addressed on the front end.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add too is like, for people watching this, listening to this, I think it's super important that people realize that this isn't like this. Warriors aren't born, right? Like warriors are made, they're trained. Look at the title of the podcast, The Education of a Weaponized Man. The education of is not the birth of Greg or the birth of Dustin, Greg, and Brad. Like, we weren't born this way. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a question that necessarily was posed to us one day and we were instantly like, oh yeah, 100%, no problem. Like, you got to put in the work. You got to get educated. You have to understand, what does it even mean to have to take a human life? How could that affect me, my family, all that stuff? Like there's a lot of work that has to go into it, which is, thankfully part of the training. But I think just for people who maybe don't realize, like, you don't already have to necessarily be able to say yes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just because it's not an instant thing, it's the first time you've ever been asked, that's okay. Like, but I think once you go and start to do the work and look at and study and figure out your own identity, figure out your own beliefs, your own values, then you can start to put legs under the table of like, yes, taking life to preserve life can be legally, morally justified, and that's okay. But yeah, some people have to do the work. Other people get it right away. That's good too. But yeah, just so people are aware of that warriors aren't born necessarily.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we use a lot, right, is I'm a big believer that the quality and the degree to which you can actually become a warrior, a true protector, is limited by the degree to which you own the problem, right? Because the individuals over 30 years, the guys that have a problem, where violent, they see violence as a problem. I mean, if you're training an individual that is like when you do, and we do and have worked with the military or law enforcement, the more specialized they are, meaning let's say the higher tier they are, the more dangerous the operations and missions and environments that they work in. There's a level of seriousness, like they own the problem in a very different way. Because when you're going to get deployed, or when you're going to get the mission call out, and that, and these guys aren't motivated for fear of their own lives. They're motivated a lot more by fear of failure and their failure costing the life of one of their comrades. They're motivated that, I need to be at my very best to make sure that, the man to the left and right of me comes home, and they're motivated by the mission, but they own the problem. So, they don't have to be, their level of seriousness and professionalism is effortless. These guys have fun. These guys, it's just a different thing. Because why? Because it's real to them. And one of the things that is sorely lacking in civilian self-defense, right, is that you have all these commercial programs that are running a business talking about self-defense techniques and talking about fighting, but a professional level program it's warfare, it's combat. I mean, I've had my toes in the water of combat sports back in the day, and martial arts and all that stuff. I'm friends with guys that are pro fighters, and that's their life. That's how they make their living, and it's a different environment of operations, theater of operations, and our environment is right outside our doors. Like, I mean, it's pretty undeniable right now that, like, on our city streets, where my wife works, there's 2 high schools. And there was 3 police officers showed up today, and she doesn't work at the high schools, but in a business adjacent to the high schools. And they were showing up wanting videotape stuff because 2 of these kids were almost beat to death. Then they had this other person, the car was stolen, there was a mugging, and there was this. Like, this is all not even the highest level shit that's going on every single day. But our transit systems, I mean, outside of our schools, our places of business, like, if you don't think that there's a certain war going on there, you're in denial. And so this idea of, like, this seriousness comes from owning the problem. And I don't want to get off topic, because what I really want to get is, the problem is that imagine training somebody and you give them the means to kill, but not the means to survive the act of killing.
Yeah.
Like, how many guys out there, how many jiu-jitsu players do you have in the world that even get to like a genuine, legitimate, like blue belt level? I think you could even just be at a white belt level. But they learn rear naked chokes, they learn neck cranks, they learn arm, whatever it is. But they, under the stress and adrenaline and the biochemical changes your body goes through under the sympathetic nervous system activation, and all of a sudden they latch that choke on and they hold it for 20 seconds. Now people might, wow, who's going to make that mistake? 20 seconds in the gym and 20 seconds on the street are two totally different experiences. 20 seconds where a human being is trying to kill you and you latch onto that and you're filled of adrenaline, you lose perspective of, you've got vasoconstriction, you're not feeling your arms the same way, you don't have the same kinesthetic sensitivity, you got auditory exclusion, the shape of the eye is changing, you get tunnel vision, you get cognitive disconnect, the forebrain is losing all the blood, so now you're in the midbrain. It's very easy for an individual to go beyond what they wanted to go in the terms of self-defense and end up killing somebody. Now, I'm not arguing whether that went from self-defense to punishment. That's for the legal system to decide, although you are now open to a certain amount of exposure with that. But let's just leave that out. You were taught the means to take life, but you were never given the tools to survive what you've just done. And again, if you're the individual that has the mindset that, like, if you could take human life to preserve life and not lose a moment's sleep over it, okay, statistically, you're an extremely rare human being. Even among special force operators, they're not filled with sociopaths. They're not filled with people that can take life and they're completely unaffected by it. So I guess you're a very rare breed, even within Tier 1 operators. I mean, again, man, by his nature, is not a killer. But man can be trained to take life. Man can be trained to very proficiently and successfully operate in extreme situations. They can be taught to use the tool of violence, and they can be taught not only how to do it, but how to survive and come back from it. Now, everybody that I've ever talked to that has any type of real world experience in this all understands and acknowledges that at the end of the day, you carry a certain amount of that with you for the rest of your life. Like Brad, you referred to it as the trauma pie. You take a slice of that. But when you're well trained, and when you've done the right work and you've been in mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, you're minimizing the amount of that trauma pie that you take. And so again, it's like, if you own the problem, if you're teaching somebody personal protection, like professional program, then it has to start with the person you're looking at saying, one day I might be sitting here with you, and it's going to be after you've taken human life in the defense or protection of yourself, your family, your property. So, and again, we're not getting into the legal and moral, like you were legally and morally justified. Let's just checklist that. If that person was one of my clients, and then I seen that person spiraling, I see their marriage falling apart and unraveling because they can't sleep at night. They're turning to drugs, they're turning to alcohol, they're having thoughts of suicide, they can't work, they can't function. If that person, their life is completely unraveling, despite the fact that us as a society, their family, their friends, the lawful authority is saying what you did was justified. You were devoid of choice in that situation, and you did the only thing that you could do to ensure the survival of yourself and your family. Yet he's still struggling. Then I would have to look at it and say, what did I do? What was I giving this person? How did I miss the tools to help this person, prepare for that? Because clearly you prepared them for the physical engagement, but you didn't prepare them for the realities of what happens when the smoke clears. And that's why this question of can you kill, right from day one, there is, for most people, there's a shock value to that. For other people, there's questioning. What do you mean, can I kill? That's not my goal here. I'm not here because I want to kill people. No, that's not what we're asking. I never asked if you wanted to kill people. Although you should tell me if you do, because that's disqualification too. The question is, can you kill? When legally and morally justified, when we paint that scenario, because if you can't even, again, 30 to 35% of people can't even get their minds there. They always think there's a way out. They always think, No, I can talk my way out of it. You don't get it. Most people can't, but I'm a smooth talker. I can talk my way out of anything. And it's like, okay, but what if you can't? No, but you don't know me. I can. Other people can't, sure, but I can. Okay, but what if you can't? We'll just chalk it up to you don't know me. And it's like, okay. So denial, rationalization, justification, minimization, excuse making, and flat out fucking refusal to recognize where you're at. And so now you're not owning the problem. Right off the bat, you've got a resistance to training. Because whatever you're teaching the person, again, I personally, for me, in good conscience, cannot train somebody and give them the skill to take life without giving them the means to survive that action. Right? And again, which is why I think this is a really important conversation, because the majority of people that are listening to this, they're not CSOR operators, they're not, tier one, spec op guys, they're not SWAT guys. They're good men who, either on their way home from work right now, or they're going to, go home, play with the kids, tuck them in, get up and go hit the job tomorrow morning. Work your ass off to provide for your family. And then all of a sudden one day, boom, you're in a situation where your life and the life of your family depends on what you do next. And that critical situation, I want you to have an answer for that. But when that's done, I want you to be able to still be at home, still play with those kids, still engage with your wife, still have a great night's sleep, wake up and go back to work tomorrow and do it again. And that way, down the road, it might not be you and your family, but you're on scene when something's happened to somebody else. In that dark moment, you're a life-saving force for them. I mean, we can't think of warriors as disposable. Like back in the day in the military, it was get them. How do we get them to do what we need them to do? How do we get them to pull the fucking trigger? We could take firing rates from 25% firing rates and bump that up to 95, 93% firing rates, 80% firing rates by the Vietnam War. And it's like, how much do you think they cared about the other half of that pie, which is, well, what do we do with them when they come home? What do we do with them after we got them to do what we needed them to do? That was never really part of the equation, because, they were just an asset. But we're talking about human life. We're talking about people that have lives. The whole reason we got into this is to be able to protect ourselves and our families. So the act of protecting shouldn't come at the cost of your mental health, emotional health, physical health, right? So I have one more, unless you guys want to throw something else downrange on that. I have just kind of a caveat I'd like to put in on this that I think is just is worth talking about. Do you guys got anything you want to throw downrange before I kind of add this other part?
No, I'm good.
Okay. It's really kind of a side tangent, but I just want to go a little bit deeper on what I said about personal protection or self-defense, and the fact that I think one of the things that is connected with this "can you kill" and why this is such or potentially a very jarring question for certain people, not for everybody, right, but for certain people, is because, again, I think that there's a misconception that when it comes to protection or self-defense, that the ultimate goal is avoidance or compliance or control, right? Like, if I become a good enough fighter, I can, if I got great de-escalation, I can, or if I see it coming, I can avoid it. That's great. I can't fully avoid it, but I can de-escalate it, right? So I can pace the aggressor. I can use verbal de-escalation tactics. I can, all that type of stuff, behavioral redirects. And so I avoid this becoming, a situation where there's a high degree of chance for harm. Or I can control, because at the end of the day, if you become a great fighter and you say, well, this guy, I could not avoid it. So now it's a physical threat. But I could snap him with some jabs, hit him with a thigh kick, put in a teep kick, grab the guy, put him in, took him to the ground, single-legged him, slammed him on the concrete, choked him, neck cranked him, held him in an arm bar, waited for police to show up. Well, all of that is a form of control. Now, there's risk to that, because the second you start punching, kicking, kneeing, elbowing, choking, there's always chance to either hurt, injure, or potentially terminate individuals. But the ultimate end of that is control. You're trying to get control of the situation. Then there's this far off thing of like lethal force. which is now you're trying to relay injury in such a manner as to terminate the individual. It's not what you want to do, but it's what you might have to do. And so I said at the beginning that I believe the foundation of self-defense is lethal force, because it's full throttle, meaning it's like there's nothing beyond that. Taking life, that's it. And that's the root of it, because it's always easier to throttle back than it is to go to that. You don't just flip your switch to kill. You know what I mean? But I want to draw a parallel with this because, and I'm going to use the Gracies as an example, because just because I want to try and show what I think is this dichotomy that's out there. I love the Gracies, by the way, right? Like Rener Gracie, awesome. What they're doing out of Torrance and stuff like that. The Gracie Combatants, great stuff. Love them, great guys. Trained a lot of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu stuff. So great guys. But you'll often hear Rener talking about, I hear him talking about, here's the great thing. Jiu-Jitsu is the thing. You don't have to hurt anybody, right? So, if there's a guy attacking you, I'm going to be safe. Like, I'm not going to get hurt, but he's not going to get hurt. So there's this situation that happens and like nobody's getting hurt. I don't have to beat this guy and I have to do all this stuff. This is great. But all those things I talked about, avoidance, compliance, control, those are the hopes and desires. That's not the root of it. That's the hope of it. I hope that every situation that ever is a real, genuine, legitimate threat of grievous bodily harm or death that is directed towards me or my family, I pray that I can avoid, I can comply, get them to comply, or I can control. But the Gracies are always talking about this situation where you can control, we don't have to hurt, you control, we don't have to hurt. And yet, both Rener and his brother are gun owners and very seasoned at how to use firearms. And a matter of fact, Rener in the middle of the night was woken up and flashlights and people running through his yard. And the first thing he did was unlock his gun, grab his gun and start making his way, clearing his house and start making his way down to the front door. To which police officers knocked and they were chasing suspects in his yard. It was all okay. But the first thing he did was grab his gun. Yet he's always talking about the fact that, like, jiu-jitsu, the most amazing thing is that you can control. You don't have to hurt anybody. And the only reason I bring this up is so then there is an acknowledgement that there are situations that you can control. Just like there's situations you could avoid or comply. But there's situations you control, and then there's situations you cannot control. And the second that you go, I don't know what this threat is, but it seems bigger than what I can control, right away the gun comes out. Because the gun is not a compliance tool. The gun can create compliance. But is the gun a compliance tool? Or is the gun an instrument of lethal force? Well, it's a lethal force tool. It doesn't mean that's the only way that it can be used. You tell a guy to get down on the ground, do it now, and he won't get hurt. And the guy gets down on the ground, does it now, and he won't get hurt. And you can say, well, the reason he did that is because I had this bad boy. Okay, but that's not what that's like. The gun is designed to shoot a projectile. You know what I mean? And when whatever it hits, it tends to destroy. That's the intent of the gun. So again, to me, even the Gracies, as much as the Gracie system and is so very effective and you can control and they're 100% right, you can have an attacker who's way bigger than you, who means to do you physical bodily harm, and you can control him. And you don't have to smash him and stab him and hurt and kill. You don't have to do all that stuff. You can control him 100%. But you have to recognize that there are situations. Otherwise, why would they ever own a gun? These guys are jiu-jitsu masters. Why would they ever need a firearm? Doesn't make sense. So they're acknowledging that, okay, there are situations that exceed the capacity of the control of jiu-jitsu. But here's the thing. To then limit yourself to go, well, I have my firearm, and if I don't have my firearm, I have no other training in this area. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like you have no. So what are the empty-handed skill sets and tools you have to take life? Like again, the choke, but now you're limited to no more mass attack, no weapon. Like you get kind of the parallel I'm talking about. And so again, I'm just trying to use this as again motivation to get people like this is why this question is important. Even if you go into an art like jujitsu, and you think, well, listen, like the vast majority of situations a lot of people might face, the controlling ability of jujitsu that you can just control another human being without injuring him or yourself, they're high. You could encounter a lot of incidents where that's very applicable. But you can't discount that doesn't mean that that's the root of personal protection or self-defense. I mean, the root of warfare. What's warfare? If I find myself in a war zone, there's enemy combatants who do not see me, maybe I'll rephrase that. They see me as the enemy combatant, and they will, if given an opportunity, kill me. That's kind of what the nature of war is. And so, is there a war on our streets? Can you find yourself in a war against a drug-addicted, repeat violent offender who's having a complete disconnect from reality, doesn't share our moral code, doesn't give a fuck about the laws of society? Yeah. And if you're in a fight for your life, you're in a war. So again, can you kill, to me, becomes one of the most valuable start point questions to try to snap a lot of the things that we're talking about into a line, and then you can start knocking them down and work the process kind of like dominoes, right? I don't know how much of that, I don't know if that resonates with you guys or not.
It actually brings a lot of thoughts in my head. I have a kind of trying to figure out a way to pose a question to you on something. I'll do my best to be concise with it. We talked about, I had an experience a long time ago, and this isn't obviously the topic of tonight, but it was about this conversation about protecting yourself and being able to take life to preserve life. The person I was speaking with was very, very religious. And it wasn't up to him, right? It was out of his control. It was out of his power. If he ended up finding that, it's like it was, he used God, and he's like, God is going to be the one that decides for me, right? So there's that thought was in, and I'm just trying to draw parallels and connect some dots because it actually really made me think about what you talked about. Two things. You talked about the police officer, trying to figure out all these other alternatives to actually saying, yes, I would shoot this person because that's what demands it. That's the task at hand, and that's what should be done, right? And then when you talked about avoiding control, deterring and de-escalation, those type of things as well. And it's like there seems to be a lot of things that people can use to not answer the question, right? Almost like coping mechanisms. It's like, well, I could talk my way out of anything, or I would go across. Like a lot of those things are great things, and you should do those things. But again, when we talk about it, it's like wipe all that away, and you have one thing that is undeniable in front of you, that it's either you have to take life to preserve life. But where it made me kind of think about is like, why do people have such deeply rooted coping mechanisms that they don't even want to fully answer the question? I would do this for, not saying you wouldn't do any of that stuff first. Yeah. Of course you would. But when like what you said, when you get down to the root of it, how come you won't even answer the question? Like there's a lot of resistance and pushback, because that's even what Dustin was saying at the very beginning. But it's almost like they want to, it's like people have a tendency sometimes to either completely delay or deter or pass the responsibility to someone else, or have these different coping mechanisms so they don't even have to answer the question in their head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and again, we come back to this, denial, and denial is a coping mechanism. Denial protects us. Like we have a survival instinct, right? The sympathetic nervous system protects us. And denial is also a coping mechanism, and it protects us from unwanted information. And so, and of course we faced numerous times over the years, people that they come into the religious conflict, and where it's like, well, it's not up to me and it's up to God. And if that was his will, and then they go, well, I can't see how God would encourage the use of violence or taking a life in any form yet. And really, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman has a new book out. It's been out for a little bit, but where he really goes into the religious connections between religion and warriorship and the sheepdogs. And I would recommend anyone that finds themselves really asking themselves these questions about how they reconcile their religious beliefs with what we're talking about in the use of violence and force. But I mean, a small example of that is, David killed tens of thousands of men in lawful combat, and then yet murdered his neighbor, murdered one man to get at his wife, and that's when he fell out of favor with God. You know what I mean? Like there's, and again, I think it's a great example of like, what are our conflicts? Is it religious for you? Is it immoral? Is it social? Is it physical? Like what is, because there are barriers, and this is the stuff that this question will force us to dive into. And the big thing, the rationalization and acceptance are the two words that you're shooting for in this. Can you kill? It forces you to look at the realities of the situation. And as you run through the scenarios, as you root through your subconscious and really start to figure out what your beliefs are, because remember, most beliefs are unwanted, inherited beliefs that were given to us by our parents, our coaches, like we inherited this shit. And we don't intellectually even agree with it, but we don't even know they're there for most people. So these conflicting beliefs are what can set you up and allow denial to kill twice. So the process we're talking about is, again, going through that. So, that's the power of why we're having this conversation tonight, is to make sure that we're not, what is it I don't want to see? What is my denial protecting me from? And then we have to slowly, typically, we have to unpack that, and that's where you get that alignment in your core beliefs, and you get your alignment, and that's where you come to the decision. So whatever it happens to be, religion or moral, or like I said, whatever it is, you can work through that process. And again, to me, it comes back to just what right, what value, what belief is more important than your life? Because the value and the belief in your right to life, because without life, you have no other beliefs or values. And listen, I'm not going to sit here. Every man and woman and every person gets to make their decisions. And I fully accept that there are people that would rather be killed than to harm another individual. I don't have to agree with that. I don't have to try to understand that. I just know that that is the case. There are people that are like that out there, and that's their choice. But I also know that I have a different choice, and it doesn't make me evil. It doesn't make me bad. It just makes me different. But I'm not looking at this from right and wrong. I need to make sure that I am right with who I am. And I don't want to live in denial, right? Dustin, did you want to jump in on that, it looked like?
I was just gonna say, I think it's important for people to understand that, like, the whole purpose for I know for us three, but really like the whole organization, we're here to help people. We're not here to change people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we're looking for like-minded people that want help on this journey. We're not here to convince all the other people that they should be doing what we're doing. If you don't want to do it, you don't believe in it, that's fine. We're not here to convince you.
Yeah.
We're just looking for people who need help. And we'll show you the way.
Yeah.
We'll help you along. We'll help you figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's a big difference, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the only thing I can add to that is I know guys that are pro fighters, like really tough guys that they absolutely detest violence. And now here's the thing. I detest violence. But they detest violence in a way where they are unwilling to use the tool of violence to defend their life. They're okay getting in the ring. They're okay, which is aggression or manufactured aggression, but they don't have that in them. They're not walking that same path. They have different values and beliefs. And so the only thing I would say though is as we're talking about this, and like you said, Dustin, we're here to help people. There is a safety catch with all this, because when you explore the violent side, like can anybody deny that human beings have a violent aspect to us? It is part of who we are. It's in our DNA. It is how we have survived for hundreds of thousands of years. So violence is inside of each and every person. And the funniest thing is when you do a lecture and people will stand up and say, not me, I could never hurt somebody. And if you ask the right questions and you wait long enough, so yeah, well, what about your daughter? You have a daughter? Oh, and you start painting a few scenarios. inevitably that person comes to the point, well, if that happened, then I would. And all of a sudden, there it is. Violence is like the silent assassin in us. Under the right compulsion, under the right ingredients, we're capable of savagery, right? And I just don't see how people can deny that fact of it. Some people repress it, some people never act. Fine, but it's inside of us. So when you explore violence, you are far less likely. The guys that end up snapping, the guys that end up in a fucking bell tower with a sniper rifle picking off university students, those guys have repressed and suppressed the violent, aggressive side of their nature to a point where they fucking snap and they break. Nothing good has ever come from suppressing what is inside of us, right? Like, look what happened with sex and the sexual repression and everything else, and I mean all of the things that come from it. It's part of it's part of who human beings are, and yet the more you want to deny and the more you want to repress and avoid and all that other shit, the more toxic and septic and corrosive that outlet becomes for those desires. And traditionally in human history, there have been two blind spots that human beings don't want to talk about, and that is sex and violence. And so when you have a process for helping people to understand and learn to control and master the violent side of their nature, the safety catch is that this work is not possible without the equal development of value systems, belief systems, compassion and empathy, and seeing it from different perspectives, and an offensive mindset, meaning growth mindset, and the ability to change, and like the two things are the yin and yang. One is not possible without the other. It really isn't, to the degree that we're talking about. So all of a sudden now you have emotionally intelligent people who understand how to process and accept and their emotional states and their thought processes. And you know what I mean? It's just this amazing thing where at the end of the day you are creating far better human beings. I believe that if all our kids in school were, and you have to be taught at the right times in the right ways, but if kids were taught to understand aggression and at the right time violence, and were taught to believe in their right to life, and taught how to physically, mentally, and emotionally to understand that their life has value, their mind has value, their emotions have value, and how to set boundaries and how to protect those values and beliefs and those things, we would have, we would be producing far better human beings. All because we're mastering the human system. And part of that is saying, understanding all aspects of what it is to be human. And violence is a part of that, just as much as sex is a part of that. And anyone to deny that sex is a part of the human experience, how the fuck have we perpetuated as a species? You know what I mean? It's like, and violence is there with it. So denying it, running from it, rationalizing it away, justifying it, minimizing, excuse making, or just flat out refusing to accept is not the right path. So, anyways, it's an interesting, deep conversation. Hopefully, we've been able to stir some thoughts in people, and I really wanted to. I think we did it. Hopefully, we did a really good job of not turning this into some macho pissing thing. Can you fucking kill? Or it's so much deeper than that, and it's funny. But I really enjoy this conversation. I enjoy having this conversation with every new member. I enjoy every time we talk about it. Because it just is. I just believe that is such a pillar of everything, of what everything else is built on for us when it comes to understanding violence and weaponizing as a protector. So, any final words, Dustin, Brad?
Yeah, I think for me is just that what we had tonight was a conversation. You said it earlier in the wrap up. It's like the things that we don't talk about in our society, in our relationships, is sex and violence. It's almost those taboo things you just don't talk about. It's okay to talk about it. We're talking about warriorship. We're talking about weaponizing. We're talking about those sorts of things. And it's like, it is okay to have these conversations, to question, to discuss it and to learn about it. And, beliefs and value systems and all those things that come with it. And it's like, why is it so frowned upon? Because there will be people that listen to this be like, oh, you guys are fucking wackos. And it's like, we're not telling people to go kill.
Yeah.
You know, if that's what you think, then you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
But it's like, these are conversations that men and women of you know, that went to war had on the way back on the boats. You know, on like they shared these things to be able to express it emotionally and intellectually. So again, it's part of the process. You know, because you know, nobody is born this way. You know, but when did it go so far deeply that it was like, oh, you guys are talking about there's something wrong with you? No, there's not. You know, no, there's not. It's a conversation. It's a discussion that if you're thinking about defending yourself and the life of your loved ones, it's like, it's got to be part of the process, and that's okay, right? It's okay.
Yeah, 100%. Well said, Dustin.
Yeah, no, not really. I guess just like at the end of the day, when you're talking about saving your own life or your family's life, like it is what it is. It's you're talking about life and death. In order to do that, you have to talk about death. You can't talk about life without talking about death. And then I think that's where the killing side of it comes in. Is like, this isn't an opinion. We aren't deciding whether or not, you know, taking life has to be a part of it. It just is. You know, Brad said it earlier tonight. Like, it just, that's one of the hard realities. People have a hard time accepting that. You talked about that, acceptance, rationalization. It's like, we didn't choose this. This just is what violence is. You know what I mean? We're sitting here studying it, trying to figure it out, learn it, pass that on. It's like, we're not making the rules. Do you know what I mean? We're just trying to work within them, essentially. So
yeah, I like that. I like both you guys' closing comments, because like I've been using the word war tonight, and you know, at some point you can find yourself in a situation where you become a man or a human being fighting for your life, and to me, you're in a war. My life matters that much that it's war, and I'm going to fight to live. I want to live. It's my right to live. I want to live, and I'm not gonna let somebody try to take that from me. Not easily, not willingly. And so, you know, it's so funny because the military and law enforcement roles and responsibilities used to be so different. What soldiers did was so different than the work that police officers did. You know, soldiers fighting a war on foreign land and all that stuff, and police officers back here policing, but they're so different. But what have we seen in the last 10, 20 years, the last 2 decades? We've seen the roles get closer and closer together. Active shooters, all kinds of homegrown terrorist acts, all these things where the role of military and law enforcement are closer than they've ever been at any other point in time in history. And so what about the civilians? If our law enforcement officers are required to do more and be more militaristic in a lot of their responsibilities and undertakings because of the threat's changed, the demands have changed. And so the civilians, we're living in those environments. And so it makes sense to me too that, again, there is a war going on everywhere in the world. And to think that there's not a war going on our city streets. Now, it's a different type of war, and we're blessed to live in the place and the part of the world that we live, but there is a war. And you know, there's a war on drugs, there's a war on violence, there's a war on, you know, it's happening. And so we are operating in a theater of environment. And we just have to understand what the threats are and see them for what they are, not worse than they are. Be grounded in reality, stay out of denial, and be prepared to you know, shoulder the responsibility of what comes with the way the world is right now and what the world is becoming. And that is why we train. That is why we weaponize every single day. So, yeah, I love the conversation. Again, hopefully you've been able to add value to people. You found something useful in it. If you have, and if you find it valuable, please feel free to like, share, copy, comment, whatever it is. This is how we grow the channel. Like we've said many times tonight, we're not looking for everybody. Not everybody's our cup of tea, or we're not everybody's cup of tea, I should say. We're looking for people that are like-minded, and your comments, your sharing, your likes, that's how other good men find us. So that's it. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. Stay safe, stay weaponized. We'll chat again soon, everybody. Have a great night.